I'd like to welcome you to our meeting on affordable housing. God bless all of us for having the strength to congregate after the couple of days we've been through. I just want to introduce my friend Lee Prater, who agreed to talk to us tonight about what the election might mean to us in terms of a change in federal policy, and also what we should do to make sure we make the most of those changes. By way of introduction, I just want to remember Lee from many years ago when we were busy on the South Side blowing up public housing. Stephen Stern, good evening. And we were blowing up public housing. Beth, good to see you. And we were trying to replace a massive public housing, a massive unsuccessful public housing project with affordable housing, market rate housing, and housing that was part of CHA, at least to CHA, scattered site CHA. And Lee and Ralph both know a lot about that process, and maybe we'll talk about that at some point in the discussion. But I just wanted to remember Lee, who was always coming to meet with me at the Alderman's office. We were trying to, among other things, bring in new public schools. And every now and then she would call me and say, "I'm so sorry, Rebecca, but the police have asked us not to drive for the next at least 30 minutes till we can get the shooting under some kind of control. So we're going to have to reschedule again." And this was before there was Zoom. So actually, if the person couldn't come to you, we didn't have the meeting. We would just put it off. And Lee was always so chipper. And she always put it, when she called me up to tell me this, she was never betrayed any nervousness or any upset. It was always so serene. "Rebecca, I hope it won't throw your schedule off, but there's just too much shooting for us to be driving over this morning." And so I have to remember that and salute her for that. So she will very calmly explain federal policy to us now. Thank you, Lee.
Thank you, Rebecca. So I'm going to do sort of a quick, because I think we've got a lot of affordable housing folks here and some folks who may not be as familiar. So I'm going to say the things that you probably are hearing if you're listening on sort of what does the federal election mean. Obviously, it means affordable housing is going to get some attention. The Trump administration, under the previous administration, was looking to cut costs and didn't really have a lot of time to talk about affordable housing. I'm sure if you're hearing anything right now, what they're saying is, until we know the Senate, we really won't know what's going to be happening. And looking at the Biden-Harris plan that you can look up, basically it falls into some traditional categories, which is that what they're looking at is increasing a huge push to increase what they are calling, what are Section 8 vouchers for all people who qualify. And what this is funding, for those of you who don't know what that is, a voucher enables residents who are at 80% area median income and below to only pay 30% of their income. There are other things on this list. It's frankly a pretty traditional list. Renters tax credits, more funds for affordable housing, strengthening anti-discrimination policies. So, and my personal favorite is moving forward, and this actually got passed right before COVID. Yes, in my backyard. That's actually the act versus NIMBY, not in my backyard. And I'm saying this, which are basically what their policies are looking to do, is to provide more money, more federal money, which we need to either build more affordable housing through various mechanisms, or provide support for residents whose incomes are lower to be able to move in and pay their rent where they're only paying 30% of their income, right, to housing and utilities. And I think the big thing right now that I would say if people are looking to figure out how they can support this effort, I sort of want to put this in, is there are a lot of us in the affordable housing community that have been advocating and saying affordable housing is a desperate need in this country. We do not have enough for the people who need it. We have long lists of people who qualify, who can't find affordable housing. And if you're in Chicago, you know this. I think the case we have made, though, is not always the strongest, because as someone in a different meeting said, it's sort of like having McDonald's try and sell hamburgers when the affordable housing developers and development community advocates for more money and more attention for affordable housing. So part of this, I think that we are looking for, and also we just went through an election where I don't think a lot of questions were around affordable housing. So what we're looking for, and I also think with COVID, and I know I'm sort of going on at length, but with COVID, I think that's as exposed as people's incomes, you know, they've lost jobs, they can't pay their rent, we've got landlords who can't pay their mortgages. All these concerns that you're hearing about are exacerbating an existing situation of a desperate need for affordable housing for folks to have. So the opportunity I think that's presented is, as we're talking about it, and for those of you who are not in developers or lenders or folks within the community, to be able to be advocates, to say this is really important, and to be able to see that nexus that having housing means.
It's gonna happen even if it's illegal.
Well, it is.
It's gonna be worse.
And people are gonna die.
People are gonna
it's
fucking
like,
die.
It's like, why?
I'm not quite
I
sure.
don't know what that was.
I assume that's a different meeting.
Yeah.
I think so.
I'm just gonna hope that's a meeting we were lucky enough not to attend tonight. Thank you, Lee, and
I
please.
thought you really struck a nerve there, Lee.
I was kind of excited that I got some energy.
Got us all
and
riled up,
excitement,
didn't
but
it?
I didn't really think that non-affordable housing developers and lenders being advocates and allies in explaining the need for affordable housing was really gonna generate that, but that was exciting.
Yeah, it was.
Hopefully we don't have it again.
That's fine. I noticed Noah Moskowitz has joined us. Thank you for coming, Noah. He's from we're talking about the need to go beyond the advocacy community, which would be you, but we're glad to have you here this evening, okay? So what do you think is the most important thing we can be doing besides advocating? What are the specific policies? I'm hoping we'll get into some real policy discussion here. I think that beyond the issues of funding, we have the issues about zoning, which is often a huge detriment for affordable housing. We have issues around zoning. We have issues around the way the city uses problems with property that's not properly maintained just as an income source and doesn't really use inspection and regulation to get compliance and to repair housing. Because another thing that I'm hoping we'll spend a little time talking about this evening is the large amount of housing we have in Chicago that is, and in Cook County, frankly, even more, some of it is even worse outside of the city within Cook County, that is abandoned, that was well built to begin with, but has not been maintained, and that is housing we could lose. And so I think that's very interesting. On the other hand, we also have now, thanks to COVID, an enormous amount of commercial property that has either been or will soon be abandoned. And the question is, and I'm hoping some of the younger people have some thoughts on this, what can we do to make use of some of that as affordable housing, because we know we're never going to be able to bring retail back to exactly where it was before COVID. So those are the sorts of questions. Lee, if you want to weigh in on that, and I know there's a couple of other folks who have thoughts on that subject. So if you want to weigh in, and then we'll pass the mic over.
Sure. So in terms of, there's a real opportunity right now as people are discussing, as Rebecca said, and there's so many different places to go with this. I mean, the first step obviously is we want to preserve the affordable housing that we have. A lot of it is older. It was built, at least public housing was predominantly built in the 50s and 60s and 70s. And if you don't maintain it and take care of it, you lose it. We also want to maintain and preserve the amount of housing that's just affordable, that is not currently subsidized. We don't want to lose the inventory we've got. And we want to make sure that it is quality housing, meaning if it needs repairs, if it needs those pieces. The other piece, I think, from a advocacy and other, is just to acknowledge that there's affordable housing that's scattered in almost every Chicago. Actually, it's in every neighborhood in Chicago, whether it's public housing coming through or whether it's items with subsidy for tenants to move in. It's scattered throughout. It doesn't look a certain way and be welcoming for those folks to be able to move in. And as Rebecca said, from a zoning and saying we do not want it here, how do we do that in this and create opportunities, whether it's so that people are not using restrictions, including aldermen, to prevent affordable housing coming in. And I think part of it is just understanding that affordable housing, including if it comes to a space near you, does not hurt your property value for folks. And some of it is just some basic factual information in terms of just being able to calm people's fears about what that is. And that's across the whole city in terms of what those what reality is. And as Rebecca mentioned, there's some great work being done across the country, and including in Chicago, to drive up the amount of affordable housing. Folks, for instance, in one case, we've all been watching, because we're all on Zoom, watching stuff from across the country in ways that we wouldn't have been able to do. There are places even looking at hotels that are troubled with folks not getting around as much, where they're using that as permanent, they're converting hotels to permanent supportive housing, for COVID needs immediately, and then also then transitioning it for housing for the homeless, which I didn't even mention sort of how do we address the homeless issue in Chicago. There's lots of questions. There's not as many financial resources to be able to serve all the people. And so part of it also is just sort of having some priorities about what do we want to focus on? And if we don't, meaning, are we talking, it has to be sort of a yes and. The homeless, obviously, that's a huge concern. That was a concern prior to COVID, more so, perhaps more so now. Folks who have lost jobs, whose incomes are at 30%, 50%, 60%, 80%, above, trying to make this work for them. And then folks in default. I mean, there's the homeowner side as well. Like, how do we address all of these pieces? And, the one other piece that comes up a lot right now is the stopping evictions. But then we've got a lot of landlords, especially smaller landlords, who, if the tenants don't pay the rent, how are they supposed to pay their mortgage?
Can I just throw in there one thing, and then I'd like to throw it to Noah. I'm warning you, I'm going to ask you to weigh in at this point, because Lee and I are so establishment by this point. We need the voice of the outside insurgent. But I got a lot of phone calls. I mean, a lot of phone calls and a great deal of concern when COVID was first hitting and we were trying to release as many people as possible from the jails and the prisons, from the housing advocacy community, from Respond Now and the other big housing providers of the shelter operators. And they said, what's going to happen to our shelter people? It's a vulnerable population. Are they going to be pushed out, literally pushed out of the shelters by your criminals, Rebecca? You know, you call them justice involved people. Are your criminals going to elbow our homeless people out of these projects that we've been working on for a long time and out of these things? And what happened was two things happened at the same time. One was we were actually able to upgrade a lot of the shelters moved from being congregate to moving into hotels and other places where you could separate people. And we were able to get that money because of the fear of COVID spreading. And at the same time, the county was able, through existing housing contracts we had that were aimed at reducing recidivism, to house many more people being released from jail and prison than we had anticipated. And in the end, the housing, the people who are the homeless advocates admitted that my criminals had not pushed their people out into the street, that we were able, and our funding at the county for people who were formerly incarcerated has gone from a couple 100,000 to, over the next 2 years, we have $6 million committed to housing people as they're released from jails and prison. So we are not gonna, we're not going to let one group of people who with great needs do something that makes life harder for another group of people with great needs. And we're very committed to that. So that's my cheerful piece. Noah, do you want to give us a view from the advocacy point of view?
Yeah.
With so much good cheer from me and Lee. Give us another view.
Well, I mean, I think I share the good cheer view, in which that, like, you know, I think to a large degree these problems seem insurmountable, but they're not. Like, they're just not. I mean, like, the United States has been a wealthier society than at any time in US history. And this isn't the first time that the United States has faced issues with rental housing or issues with housing at all. It's just the first time or one of the first times in US history that at like every level of government, there's been a lack of willingness to invest the resources that are required to do something about it. At the city level, at the county level, at the state level, and at the federal level, nationally. That's not true across the board, but it's certainly true in Illinois, I think. And so, as always, I think it's a question of resources. I mean, I think that there are policies out there which would dramatically fund affordable housing, that would dramatically increase the flexibility of affordable housing providers to be able to build and develop and preserve. I think.
And specifically, give us some examples of those policies.
Sure. So the real estate transfer tax, that's a no-brainer. Taxing real estate transactions over $1 million, I think, by like an increase in less than a percentage point or about a percentage point, in order to raise $150 million a year for homeless prevention, homeless services, affordable housing development. I think Ms. Prater would probably disagree, and that's totally legitimate. I think people on either sides of issues can disagree, but what's not disputed is that in 2013, the CHA had 3,000 vacant units. In 2014, the Sun-Times did an article that the CHA had a $450 million surplus, that pensions were paid up until 2080, paying the pensions for people who hadn't hired yet or hadn't been born yet, and that they had paid off all their debts, which sounds good for a city agency, except for the fact that CHA is a real estate development agency, affordable housing developer. It should be borrowing collateral on the 25,000 units that it owns to go and develop tens of thousands more affordable units. Obviously, you can't put it all in the CHA, but that is the case. Yeah, I'm gonna let you respond to that, I'm sure, in a second, Ms. Prater. But Rebecca asked me, so if you want to blame somebody, blame her. No, I'm just joking. Obviously, I support rent control. That's not something that has destroyed the housing market in New York City, or San Francisco, or any of the other places where it's been. Oh no, am I going on blast? Who's watching me? We're streaming live on Facebook.
Oh, I hate Facebook. Okay, keep going.
You obviously can't put it all on the city. You probably can't even put most of it on the city, because the fact of the matter is that HUD hasn't been funded in the way it needs to be since the 80s. So,
You got Lee to agree to that one. She's
Right,
not, I don't know
right.
if you can see her.
and I do think that we can and should talk about the zoning issues. Absolutely. I certainly think that Ms. Prater and I would agree on how awful it is, like cases you have on the Northwest Side where affordable housing developers can and want to build, and you have aldermen that are saying no, and that is awful. I think, and this is something the mayor's working on, we can strengthen the affordable requirements ordinance, and we should do that. I'll leave it at that, because I know I've been spatting my mouth off, but
I hate to make this not controversial, but there's not as much stuff I think perhaps that we disagree about. I think some of it is just facts in terms of CHA, at least I am every day working to get loans to build more housing. And we are trying to use our money and assets and land to build more units to preserve existing 50, 60-year-old buildings that could use some attention and support. And I think see ourselves, at least at CHA, working with the city, working with IDA to see how we can work together to strengthen, to preserve, and to create new housing. And frankly, to honor the commitments we made to communities at CHA when we tore buildings down, right? That needed, and get those. So when you drive in certain areas where it's vacant land, a lot of it are CHA owned sites, and get those done with all the financing tools we can. So I think we see ourselves, CHA does, as being part of the solution, recognizing that getting money and being strategic with HUD as you said, a developer, but and not no buts, and making sure that our residents, the CHA residents, are living in quality housing. And that's challenging when most of your stock is 50 or 60 years old.
And I'd
So,
like to
no
ask
argument.
Ralph, I'd like to ask Ralph Brown to weigh in, if you would. Ralph, are you still here?
I am.
Because you built I remember you building a heck of a lot of houses back in the day.
Yes, that's all been with government programs, and those require lots and lots and lots of money. I suppose the only observation at the moment is this: everything you mentioned needs money. And if you look at the whole field, there are scores of programs or mechanisms whereby housing gets built and maintained. And they each have a constituency, and they're all surviving now, and they all have great demands for more of their product, and they all need more money. So we can talk about adjusting programs and make them more efficient. But sooner or later, we come back to money. I think there's a chance that there's a receptivity to spending money for housing in a Biden administration. But I think we are all afraid that a Republican Senate will make sure that there's not any more money for social causes. And so the difficulty will continue. So I think the long and the short of it has to be the search for money. But certainly every program has been contributing something. And every program has a constituency. And I think we don't want any of the programs wiped out. We want them all to expand. But in the end, it's money. So I'm waiting to hear about some magic. And I think it's tragic that the obvious that the constitutional amendment here in Illinois failed, and a possible source of a little let up in the financial situation is not going to happen. And if anything, people's taxes are going up.
The wrong people's taxes.
You know, sorry.
I would, no, I want to hear what you have to say. I also want to give Aaron a chance. I'll give you a chance, Noah, but when you drag your kids to meetings and they have a particular take on affordable housing, you have to give them a chance to talk. And he I know will want to bring in some broader issues that relate to the intersection between affordable housing and renewable resources. But Noah.
Oh, I was just going to quickly remark on something Mr. Brown said, which is that
Call him
Ralph.
Ralph.
Please, Ralph.
Because I think ultimately we all do agree that it comes down to federal funding, and insofar as the Republicans have cut off federal funding and then have a lack of willingness to tax the wealthiest people in the country and use that money to stabilize housing and stabilize communities in our country, like that's a problem. And there's a good question that I think can be asked. Okay, well, that's fine. Like, we live in deep blue Chicago. We don't live in red Alabama or red Mississippi. So, what can we do about it? It's a legitimate question, I think, to ask in a lot of cases. But I think the question could be posed, like, do all of our Chicago, Illinois, in that area, Congress people support robust increases, like bold, unabashed, robust increases in funding for affordable housing? And I think that if we went through their positions one by one, we find that they might not. And there may be opportunities there. I think our expectations for federal funding are so low, legitimately so, that I wonder if we've left some of these people off the hook. And they'll say, well, what do you want me to do? My Republican colleagues can't do anything about it. And we can say, all right, fine. Well, there's tons of bold federal legislation on affordable housing. Just sign on to it. We just want to see you sign on to that. There's something called the Homes Guarantee. There's something called the Home to Thrive. Every national progressive organization has their own pie in the sky affordable housing legislation. Great. Sign on to all of them. And at least then we know in Chicago that we've done our part. Anyway, I'll just leave it at that.
No, I think that those are all exactly the sorts of things that ought to be said at an IVI town hall, because the IVI is about holding politicians to their promises, including the ones they don't even want to make. And I think your questions should be recorded and should be part of the next round of questionnaires that we do, because it's not enough to ask people if they're in favor of affordable housing. You have to push it a little past that point to really delve. And there's some downstate folks that we need to be part of pushing them to answer more questions. So I think that your comments are actually very good for a meeting sponsored by the IVI IPO. Aaron, did you have anything you wanted to share with us about broadening the look of affordable housing? Or you've done your affordable housing with the shoestring approach, and federal money has not been much of a part of it. So maybe you should talk about what you've been up to a little bit.
Okay, so on the south side, I buy trash buildings and fix them up, and then if I can, add legal units to them. And one of the things that actually wouldn't cost money to implement would be for locally would be the zoning issues with that we have so many 2 flats or single family homes in Chicago that we would like to add more units to the buildings, but the parking requirements are what stop you, because normally the lots are 25 feet wide. So you can only put, 2 cars there. or if it's shortened a little bit, maybe one car, and then you can't have a 3 flat. And so I've run into that issue a lot of times in Woodlawn and South Shore and Bronzeville. And I think that's something we could do that wouldn't cost much money. And, the zoning at the bigger issues also for the large developments, but even for very small developments, the zoning causes a huge problem. Every day now we hear that we're not going to have a car. Car will be a service, right? So then it's really a waste of space to dedicate the space for car for each unit of housing. And they do have the transit development areas, but it's very, very small. It's like a quarter of a mile or something, right? In a lot of the places. So it's the same thing. People can walk 6 blocks to a train. And it wouldn't cost anything to fix that. And we should be blue enough to be able to do that. But, they have the same problem everywhere in the country. It's the same issue about the parking spaces for cars. So, but yeah, that's the one thing that's the issue that I run into the most. Parking requirements for the zoning.
No, to add to what Noah said, and I completely agree with Aaron, some of this is just exploring what our codes are and where our standards are today in terms of what people need for housing and be able to leverage that, which I believe this Department of Planning and Development is looking at in terms of zoning, and receptive with the mayor's office to be able to look at this and just being able to say exactly your point, which is if you're trying to get this done, let's get this done. Let's figure out how to do it. And I think though, the affordable housing in my view, the affordable housing with representatives and senators, whether it's at the state level or the federal level, is from sort of the advocates, the developers, and it's not sort of, we know that people having a quality, safe place to live affects more than just the housing world, which is why I'm sort of saying that McDonald's to hamburgers. It's the healthcare workers who want to be able, it's all those people who are the folks doing the COVID work, our essential workers. Where are they living? And the medical centers being able to say, we support you. We want people to be healthier. We don't want these people going this far to be able to get to the hospital, for that nurse to be able to take care of you, or for that phlebotomist to be able to do this, like or the transit worker, et cetera. So I think part of it from the affordable housing is getting the allies to be able to say, this is a good investment. Affordable housing is really valuable, and being able to make that case, which I think is one of the pieces in sort of getting additional resources, that I know that there are groups in the state. Linda's a member of one, to be able to advocate on that. But the more that we can bring partners in and other folks to understand, I really do believe that assists elected officials be able to explain and justify in the best ways spending the needed resources on affordable housing.
Well, can I ask Beth a question here, who hasn't spoken so far? Because I was so excited when Beth agreed to join, because when you look at her, she looks like a person on your screen, but she's actually the National Conference of Jewish Women. And the National Conference of Jewish Women has not addressed this issue. Is that correct, I think, Beth? And they address a lot of issues. And so I think she's in a good position to tell us what we would have to do, what we would have to get from And the answer to that, Joseph Michael Carr, is yes, of course you can ask a question. But let me just ask Beth this question, and you are the next question. Is what do we, to get advocacy, and I hope you won't be offended, but to me, the National Council of Jewish Women is a mainstream group. It's not an out there young people's group. It's a mainstream group. And if you guys decided that you were really interested in affordable housing, a lot of politicians who could discount Noah as an advocate, and my son is just a wandering nut, you're the heartland. They would have to pay attention. So what do we have to do to get you and your folks involved in this discussion? We can't hear you.
Turn on your mic.
Of course
Turn
you
on your
can.
mic.
I just clicked the mute
Good.
off. Okay. Thank you. Yes, we were founded 125 years ago in Chicago. So yes, we're definitely mainstream. Right now, we're still in the education stage because listening to you talk, I'm still putting things together about what we can do, some of the basics. I think we might need at least 1 or 2 education programs on it. And then gathering people to talk to their older people. I think, and is this might sound crazy, is this strictly Chicago or all of Northern Illinois?
It's America.
It's
Well, okay.
everywhere, everywhere.
Okay,
It's got national constituencies, statewide constituencies, local ones.
and I was thinking that we're primarily work in Illinois on Illinois issues. So that's where we would get involved. And I know we're doing a series called Anti-Racism is a Verb. And housing is obviously one of the huge things. Starting with having basic information. I know that there's a program on the North Shore that now is sponsoring next week or so, that I know some of the women on the North Shore are going to be attending, even though it's online. So we're going to talk about what we can do together, Chicago, and to have all of our members, because we're in Chicago and North Shore, to see what we can do in the way of contacting aldermen, legislators, what we can do. We're happy to be involved.
Well, that's great. And I'll just tell you as an encouraging word, Noah and I lobbied an alderman together and got absolutely nowhere. Is that not correct, Noah? We did such a poor job. I've written it up in my diary as like disastrous. But anyway, so whatever you guys do, I bet you do better than we did. Now, Mr. Carr had a question, so I wanted to make sure he gets his question out.
Sure, there I am.
Here you are as a person. Hello.
Yes, instead of a logo. So my question is for Lee, and she referenced it earlier about the eviction cliff. And I know that it's not related directly to affordable housing, but I wanted to get what you prescribe as a diagnosis for this cliff that's coming up. I have a friend who is representing a group of Chicago landlords about the eviction cliff on the other side. So I would like to hear what you have to say.
I think the eviction, as you talk about an eviction moratorium, that's all I'm trying to say is it is on both sides. So we've got a situation right now, right, where we've got tenants in housing who need to be able to stay in the housing, right? And can't afford their rent, and people are advocating, there's a moratorium on evictions. Well, then you've got the landlords, as you were saying, who need to be able to pay their mortgages. These are good people, or not good people, but most, good landlords who just need to don't want to lose their properties and want to be in a position where they can maintain it. So we just need to handle both sides of this, right? And that is how do we do this in a way with COVID, and the jobs are just not there. So people are doing everything they can, but we certainly don't want folks not to have a place to live, but we also don't want landlords to be in terrible shape either. So we've got both sides. We've got a problem with both sides that I think we understand. But right now, this is a case where the state, Illinois needs federal money. The city of Chicago needs federal money to be able to provide that assistance. And I think what we're hoping for, right, is then that in the relief that comes with COVID, we'll be able to address this. And I think the part of this, COVID has just exacerbated existing affordable housing needs. The needs were there already as part of it just makes them so much worse. And and I'm not going to say silver lining because there's nothing that's silver lining, but sort of the only is to say, we do have a larger conversation right now about affordable housing than we've had as a result of this, and people sort of understanding what this dynamic is, which does present an opportunity, Beth, for you or for others to be able to say, we need to resolve this because we in Illinois have too many people who are severely rent burdened, and they need to be able to have a place to be successfully, right? We need to do these things. This is really important to be able to do. And because it does affect children's education, health. I mean, the number of pieces that are related to having a quality place to live is tremendous. And that's why I think making that cases for other advocates and other folks to understand the tremendous importance of doing this, and why, as Ralph said, putting the dollars there is a really good investment.
Keep in mind,
Yes,
this is a Republican problem as well as a Democratic problem. It is a human problem, and there are millions of people who are at risk of getting thrown out. The courts will be totally jammed up with eviction proceedings, and those who get thrown out, it destroys families, it ruins health, it wrecks everything. And there's no reason why, when it's both a Republican and a Democratic problem, why the whole nation can't get behind pushing Congress to come up with a phenomenal amount of money, which is what it's going to need. But then keep in mind, if a phenomenal amount of money is spent on the rent issue, where are we going to get yet further money for all the development issues?
But Aaron, do you just want to report in? You are seeing people getting rental assistance right now, correct?
Yeah, from the state. They were just released money for, I think, 20,000 apartments, and there were 80,000 people asked for assistance for that program.
But you've seen actual money.
Yeah. Go right into the bank account.
With the government, you always, I work for the government. You just have to make sure that you see the actual money at some point. Well, I really appreciate the comments that are coming, and we can keep coming. I wanted to make sure that none of the people who I didn't give birth to are feeling ignored in the questions. So there's Lily Lerner there, Alan Kravitz, Linda Brace, Alex Breland, our membership person. If somebody has a question they'd like to, or the famous Stephen Stern, that they'd like to see part of this discussion, certainly wave at me, chat at me. I'll make sure you, Stephen.
It's not so much a question, actually it is a question or a comment. Given the financial circumstances created by this pandemic, and on our state level, the failure to pass the Fair Tax Amendment, I'm wondering how realistic it is to talk about the problem being money, only being money, okay? As opposed to talking about what regulations, what laws, what things that that exists now, as I think Aaron hinted at, could, if they were changed, would make it enlarge the possibility of people being able to live in housing, whether it's affordable or not, okay, and or whether how great it is, and what things that we think will open that up. And by way of example, just recently, we, meaning IVI IPO, was part of a coalition, and we celebrated the fact that the recent Cook County ordinance was changed to include barring discrimination against people based upon the fact that they had a criminal background, which opened up some housing opportunities to them. When I was a young man, the biggest fight that I was trying to fight, and I think we were successful at it, was trying to prevent discrimination against people who had Section 8 certificates. I know that there are probably certain ordinances, regulations, things that make it hard to not the least of which are probably in the zoning area, that make it hard for people who even want to do housing to be able to accomplish that. So, what I like to see is kind of a list of the 10 top things in Chicago, in the state. I don't think the county is going to be, I think we have a great person with the county, but I'd say I'm more focused on the Chicago and the state, that we would say these need to be done. And then we go to legislators, or the people who are advocates go to legislatures and say, what's your position on this? And, rate them or decide what we're going to do about them in connection with that. So that's that's my 2 bits of comments. And I know there are advocacy organizations. I was part of one. I was with Legal Assistance Foundation. I was with the Leadership Council, and there were a list, people like Bill Weiland, who devoted his life, to trying to open up housing, and the Poverty Law Center, who continues, I think, to fight the good fight about just that regulation. Bauman in the area of public aid, okay, or public. So that I know that they have those lists, and I think those are the things that maybe this is the wrong Zoom meeting, okay, to talk about that, okay.
No. This is a very open Zoom meeting. We are big enough here to look at it from different ways. I think, Aaron, you've identified zoning issues, financing issues, and also your other big thing, which I respect you for, reducing costs through different ways of heating and cooling and all the rest of those things that are very interesting to you. And sometimes when you're doing that stuff, you run into roadblocks, correct? I also think that the city's approach, which used to be to get people to keep their housing fixed up, and that was the main thing in their enforcement, in their code enforcement. Code enforcement is an issue that's very rarely talked about, including, I would say, among the housing advocates. They ignore the whole issue of how code enforcement is done. And code enforcement is no longer a means to keep property up in Chicago. It's basically a means for revenue. It's $1,000. If we have to come out, if we write you a ticket, it's $1,000. We don't, it used to be plans and permit 30 days. Now it's $1,000. Anytime we come out, even for a failure to mow your grass fast enough, it's $1,000. And we really have to think about are we going to keep looking at housing as being a source of tax revenue? I'm not talking about the property tax, I'm talking about code enforcement as a source of revenue. I saw you nod, Aaron. I'm going to call on you.
Yeah, that just reminds me of one time when we went to put solar panels on a 3-flat, and the city came to inspect it, and it ended up being $30,000 worth of electrical work to make them happy at the meter. And that's pretty discouraging to tell other people. Wait, don't get solar. The city will go after you. Yeah, there's countless examples of that.
Beth?
Yeah, Aaron, were you done?
No, ask him a question. It's good for him.
Okay, yeah, I'm trying to see how we can have this, and it's on our agenda. We being the City Salon, these are monthly programs all dealing with social justice issues. And on Friday, the steering committee is meeting, and we're planning out next year. So Rebecca, next week, I will call you to plan a program for us as a beginning education thing. And you all know all these details about how things work and introduce ideas. I almost see this developing it as a game that the groups of people could play to learn how affordable housing works or doesn't work, kind of a thing. So I'm putting together all the things that need to be explained to people so that, yes, we want affordable housing for everyone to end racial discrimination. What about my backyard?
NIMBY.
Yeah, Yumby would be nicer, but so, you know, these are all questions that I know people will have to explain it. You brought up ideas that I hadn't even thought about. Yeah, but if you evict someone now, who are they going to get to replace the apartment, the rent? But yeah, the landlord has to pay his or her mortgage. And how do you apply for to get Section 8 housing? So you're thinking I'm crazy, but it's like, oh, all of these questions, how does everything all fit together?
Well, we'll
So-
develop a game for you called You Be the Landlord and You Be the Tenant. But
Okay.
Joseph, you had a question in chat?
Yes, I just wanted to know if that would be open to other groups. Could we invite our membership to that?
Oh, absolutely. I
You-
keep growing the mailing list.
Right.
Because Beth was the one who got us originally, Joseph, in touch with the Support the Vote people.
I know. I've been
Okay.
I've been on several Zooms.
That's why you look familiar. Sure, that's right. Sure.
Yes, that's the only reason we meet people nowadays. It's that they're on the same Zoom.
On
And
the
there's a hope we'll
It's a
get to
small
know
Zoom
them a little
world.
bit. And that is so sad. That is so sad.
Small Zoom world.
Yeah,
Yeah, all Zoom all the time.
yeah.
Well, we have 6 minutes left here. Would everybody like to suggest a resource? Noah, is there a group or a source for more information that you'd like to mention and you'd like to see other people take a look at?
Can I send an email to you to send to this
Sure.
group?
Oh, absolutely.
I think that would be best because, I mean, I think to Beth's point, there's a lot of, I mean, I think it's twofold. I think one, like, it's not an accident that these problems are way more complicated than they appear to be. I
Mhm.
mean, European countries have national public housing programs. The United States should quite simply have federal public housing because that's how every other industrialized country does it. You know,
Okay.
there are bad reasons why we don't have that, and instead we have this like absurd patchwork that makes it way more complicated than it needs to be. But you know, that's the way it ought to be. The way it is we do have this absurd patchwork. So I would prefer to send out kind of like, if you're interested in this kind of thing, you can look here. If you're interested in that kind of thing, you can look here. You know that. I'll send that out to Rebecca, and then you know, people can pay attention to it as they go.
I think I have more of a help question. And I'm just going to keep stressing, I think we have a patchwork in part, as Noah mentioned, And the reason being because as Ralph was saying, to get advocates, meaning the lender community, other folks we have a trickle down model with affordable housing in terms of how we finance it. So we have big banks and other groups who are getting reduction of their taxes for the low income housing tax credit. Like, this is a system that's been created to make sure that we've got other big organizations and lots of people engaged in the process with us. And that does not mean it's always the most financially efficient delivery. No, to get stuff out there. Obviously there are advantages and disadvantages with all of this. I think the question I have, and a lot of organizations who are passionately devoted to housing and quality housing, and frankly, because it's not just building the housing, because we know it impacts people's lives in real ways and really important ways for their families, children, seniors, the disabled community, it's on and on and on in terms of the needs. I think the question is just, how do we in the affordable housing world make this very complicated menu of things clearer for people? So Beth, your question about sort of saying, I don't know, I think in helping guide us as we discuss it, because whenever, as Ralph said, whenever you're asking for it, because it isn't just money, it's also just saying, this is important, right? This is really important that we figure this out. How do we make that case so that we can, that coalition that says this is really important can happen? And I think that has to come from outside the folks who know all the details of of implementing it. We could use some help because we're not good at translating this into making that case. So for the folks who are really good at it, I think that's a help that you could provide for some of the organizations that are working on this and advocating with the state on policy issues and advocating, with at whatever level, right? Local, state, and federal. So to me, that would be incredibly helpful.
Okay.
And on a last note here, just to impress Joseph Carr with my zealousness as an IVI IPO board member, we have a fundraiser coming up, and I have coerced Aaron into offering a tour of how he is using alternative energy to support affordable housing. So if you want to go and see a basement that's been turned into geothermal using the new smaller rig for digging out a smaller space, or you want to see solar being employed in affordable housing, he will pick you up in his Lexus and drive you around. Now his Tesla, what did I say? God, I'm so old. His Tesla, I'm so old and I'm so tired of Zoom meetings. I can't remember which one I'm in, but he will pick you up in his Tesla, the appropriate vehicle, and drive you around to see how you put geothermal in, and in small spaces with smaller rigs, how you use solar in rehabilitated buildings, as in rehabbed buildings, as opposed to in all new buildings and things like that. And so this is a big, the green in the service of green energy in the service of affordable housing, and another way to make it sustainable and cheaper. So I can't even say the name of cars correctly, I guess, but tonight is a good night. We have a new president, and I really want to thank everybody for joining us and talking about this issue, which I think is important to each of us in a different way, but it's good to talk about how we can share our interests and make sure that we look at things from a number of different perspectives. And I think that I will also say that's something that the IVI is very interested in, is taking a complicated issue and looking at it from a number of viewpoints and not just trying to turn it into a slogan. And so if you're not an IVI member and you're willing to think about it, and you're interested in an organization that really dives into the issues, Alex is is showing himself now on the screen now. He's our membership chair. He'll be happy to sign up anyone who's interested. But I think this is an organization, I learned this when I was myself a candidate for alderman, that's willing to look beyond the slogans into the actual issues, see what's really important, and then try to find those people involved in politics who are willing to look at things in some detail and really meet a standard of advocacy. So I'd like to thank all of you and thank Joseph for running the Zoom. This is the one reason why I do not, normally at one of these meetings, I have to apologize for whatever technical errors I made, but this evening, no one let me near anything, so I was not allowed to make any technical errors, and so I don't have to do my ritual technology apology, which is a great relief to me, and I want to thank all of you for that, and for spending the evening with us. Do you want to?
Can I make a comment before?
Yes.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, sorry for the day. I've been listening the whole time, but I've got two little kids watching around. I thought it best that I just listen and not try to get engaged while they were up. But first of all, thanks to our president. We should wish him a happy birthday. He had a birthday over the weekend. So happy birthday.
Happy birthday.
Big 5.
Happy birthday.
The big 5-0. And he got a nice haircut for that, too.
I know, you see, right?
You're looking good. But the one comment that I will add to the group is listening. I think one of the things that stood out to me was the intersectionality between affordable housing and so many other issues. And I think it sounds like it's a little difficult. There are clearly some distinct things that could be done policy-wise to tackle the issue of affordable housing. But I think it's amazing and, I don't know, hopefully an opportunity for great collaboration because housing's linked to so many other things like education. You see homeless students have difficulty in the classroom. You see jobs struggle to get people, we struggle to get a match between where jobs are and where people will be, or sometimes people work in places where they can't live. And you have folks who are recently released citizens who struggle finding stable housing, which impacts their ability to support their families, which is a crucial part of getting back and avoiding recidivism. So I don't know if I have the answer to all those things. I don't think I do. But in just listening, I mean, I think we suggested some things to improve housing, but that's the stark thing that stood out to me as we listened to the call, and that I would, I think it's something worthwhile pursuing as we discussed affordable housing. And that also comes with jobs as well, right? Like what exactly is affordable housing? I don't know. It depends on how much you can afford. So that's my contribution to the group. But thanks for the conversation.
Thank you very much. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you so much for joining us. If you liked what you saw today, go ahead and like the video down below and also subscribe to the channel so you can get notified about whenever we put out new videos about new topics that are interesting to the world that you live in. Thank you.